Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hello, hello. We are
Hi.
back again. Don't say hi yet. I'm not done.
Hi, yeah.
We
Hey,
are
what's
back.
up?
I wanted to get in with that. I'm like, hey.
Hey guys. I'm just kidding.
Hello.
I'm just kidding. Love you so much.
Hello.
We are back sans Brett, but pro Jessica. And Jessica, I think you were the first time we've ever had a guest more than once. So if that says anything about how awesome you are,
I feel extra special right now. If I can talk, yes.
we're gonna have.
Usually they won't come back after they experience this once, so you're the only one that's ever agreed to apply.
You're the only one.
Maybe I learned my lesson the first time.
We just get a microphone in the mail, and it's like, thanks.
Yes, it's like I don't want to see you guys ever again. Sure.
Please don't speak to me.
Yeah.
Emotional damage engaged.
But yeah, we've got our brunette gals back on today, and Josh and Ray are here. Whatever, it's fine.
We're here, whatever. Yeah, the drones.
the drones, exactly.
From the last episode, if you remember, if you're a constant listener, your beekeeping references.
Our drones, and then Jessica and I, just killing it over here. But anyways, Jessica said something before we jumped on here, and I was like, no, we got to save that because I just think everyone can relate to this. And if you can, honestly, are you even a human? I think you're an alien. Jessica, you and I have a particular thing that we take to the office with the intention of it not leaving the office, but it always manages to make it back home. And that is in our lunchbox. And what is that item?
That would be an apple. Sometimes an orange, but maybe not as
an
often.
Emotional. I call it my emotional support fruit.
Yeah,
and they make their
constant traveler
in the office, and we get them out, and we wash them and set them there. And we're like, "Hey, buddy, I'm going to eat you today." And then they go back to our office. They're like, "You're going to be the afternoon snack."
Yep.
And then we find cheese or beef sticks or
Hershey's Kisses, whatever.
And then at the end of the day, we're like, "Okay, buddy, get back in the lunchbox.
We'll see you again tomorrow,
go home.
friend."
Go home.
Yeah.
I have emotional support fruit, and I also have emotional support yogurt.
I used to have one of those.
It travels to the office, it goes to the fridge, and I'm like, you're my afternoon snack. And then I find some other garbage to stuff in my face.
I have emotional support chopped bag lettuce occasionally, and it judges me from the bottom crisper drawer with brown eyes, crying and weeping. Yes.
That one probably doesn't last as long as our
It
apple.
judges you as you eat your Taco Bell.
No, the apple looks at the lettuce and says, "You're next, lettuce." So yeah, the apple usually outlasts the lettuce. So absolutely. Why do we do that? It's it's just in case starvation sets in, I guess. It's like the last ditch effort.
One of those things you see where they're like, I am not the same person I was this morning as I am in the afternoon. When I wake up, I'm like, I have all these great intentions. I'm going to eat healthy today. I'm going to do all these things. And then you get to the office and somebody's like, oh, you're getting nachos? Well, I can save my lunch for tomorrow.
Tag
you just basically go with a plan for people to derail you. You're like, come on, somebody say, let's go to eat.
Somebody say Reese cup. Anybody? Chinese buffet? That's Alethea and I. My coworker.
Oh, gosh.
She'll literally come into my office. She kind of swings in with this random amount of swagger that she has. And she's like, so I brought my lunch today. And I look at her and I'm like, I also brought my lunch today. And she's like, but I don't want my lunch today.
I don't want that apple.
And then before you know it, somehow we're at the China
crab
buffet.
rangoon. I cannot pass up a China buffet. I can't. I mean, Mexican is great, but my original weakness will always be the China buffet.
Which I introduced Josh to crab rangoons
the Greek
recently.
Yeah.
Just recently?
Yeah. Yeah, Josh had never listen. We went out to eat after the fruit and vegetable conference, and I said, "Do you want to split some crab rangoons?" And he's like, "I don't know what that is." I was like,
what is that?
Delicious.
It's
just
little
pillows
I
of
hadn't
taste
ordered before. Yeah, that was great. Great. I mean, it's fried, right? It's fried.
Yeah, I was like,
yes,
it's
exactly.
cream
They drop
You
it
can
in
put
boiling oil.
anything in a
Yeah.
pocket of fried whatever, and I'm gonna be like, this is incredible.
It's like
He
a
was
tug
just like,
wrap
I
up.
will take that. Yes, thank you.
And it's all about the sauce too. I mean, it's so many times it's about the sauce.
That was like a duck sauce kind of thing they had
I think
going
so.
on.
Yeah.
You know, I noticed one thing. There's no apples anywhere on a Chinese buffet usually. None that I go to.
Maybe like a decor. Maybe they've like cut one into like a swan, and it's like on the buffet.
All right,
you know,
true.
like
yeah. They use that's
otherwise
true,
no.
But what we are talking about today, if you saw the episode title and you're like, are they going to get to it? We're 5 minutes in. Is garden plan, garden layout, nothing garden design, nothing super specific. So just to start, I think a lot of times when we hear the word like garden, two things come to mind. It's usually vegetables or small scale. So I think what we're at least what I plan to hit on today was something that could be applied to whether you're doing cut flowers, and also things that apply to large operations that you can also use whether or not, you're doing just like a small backyard garden. So I think a lot of the things we're talking about today really are applicable to everyone. So, hang around and join us for that. And by join us, I act like there's going to be a commercial comes on, but we're not sponsored. So let's just continue where we were.
Sponsored by the Apple Growers Association. Yes.
Make sure to purchase your emotional support apple.
Well, I want to hear from you guys, not only about the many reasons why you don't eat apples, what's wrong with you people, but I want to hear from you guys, like personally, like I know you guys all grow things or have grown things or will grow things in the future, but some of your processes that go through your brain for your own personal or professional situations in some cases, how you guys kind of go about things when you're making decisions. We're kind of broad today. It could be commercial, could be for home, just whatever. I mean, like, how do you guys make decisions? How do you start forming this process in your mind? We talked about on the previous episode when we start to get these garden seed catalogs in, my eyes dilate. I'm pretty sure it's like I go into some kind of weird trance-like state, and it's so much fun. It's the looking at those seed packs. It is so much fun.
You want to grow everything.
In the mail yesterday. 3 in the mail. And I was like, I'm going to look through all of these. And
what a wealth of that. Like each little seed pack represents such incredible, like, potential for the future. I mean, like, it's incredible. One seed pack can grow so much, and we have local growers that they purchase so many seeds, they donate them back to us. And I love that. They're at the local office that I'm in, because I guess they just purchased so many and they have so many left over, because a lot of the people I work with are smaller home gardeners, a lot of them. But yeah, the seed companies, they are good at selling their wares. Sure.
Yeah, like I get seed catalogs for my married name and my maiden name.
You're double dipping, ma'am. Right? That is not allowed.
I get them at the office too. So I'll get, like,
I get 3 of the same
catalogs. Yeah.
And they're so bright and cheery on a dreary January Kentucky winter day. It's like opening sunshine in front of me. And then I start pushing buttons and ordering things. I mean, it's sometimes good, sometimes not good.
My favorite seed catalog has no pictures in it.
Ooh.
Is there such a thing?
What is this, a spreadsheet?
It's an heirloom catalog, isn't it?
It's an Excel file. That's what
it is. It's an Excel file that you hide from,
like an Excel file, but in a catalog
Notes,
form.
red, pretty.
Pretty, love it.
It is for where I order. You can order veggies there too, but cut flower seeds from. And so I'm buying in like large quantities, right? And so I'm spending $1,000 on seed, unfortunately, which really isn't that much for a lot of people.
Yeah, but you could. That's commercially for you though as well. I mean, it's more than just home plantings. Yeah,
right. It's all
an excuse to feed the addiction.
All in Latin, so you have to know the Latin names, and then there's like really brief descriptions, and there's no words, and it just makes me feel.
Is this like a speakeasy for wildflower seeds? Is this a speakeasy?
Like I'm like, let me just open
like
up my.
Not everybody could read that, right?
Lupin. What is that?
Like, not to be, Brad or anything, because I also
know things.
But like I know things, and this is the one time the things I know really come in handy.
Do you order too many seeds for what you are trying to accomplish, Alexis? And I say seeds, I know you deal with a lot of other bulbs and other planting
plant tissue.
I have really tried to refrain unless I know it's seed that will keep for a couple years. So a lot of the seed that I work with really is only good for about a year. So I try not to like overbuy. So really thinking about my planting plan, which goes into what we're talking about today. So I do kind of a planting plan. I know, I want to grow these things. I need at least this many plants, which means I need at least this many seeds. But for me, when you're spending $1,000 on seed, you really can't like spend a ton of extra. So you can't just buy everything. And I still I still get caught up in but usually for me it's color. So I'll have one or two things I experiment with usually every year. And then for me, it gets the color. So I know I love a type of celosia. And so I want it in every color. And I have to like back off and be like, am I really going to use that red celosia? It's very, very difficult. But yeah, talking about planning, plan first, buy second. And so I think usually we get that flipped. Usually we buy things first and then we have to figure out where the heck we're going to put it,
I feel like
how to grow it.
Personal attack.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. But it is, if you're doing it, I think the better way to do it, and not that we're not all guilty of not doing it this way, but is to plan first and then purchase after that. But that's my 2 cents in it.
You had an interesting experience. I don't know, how many years have you been in your current property there, Alexis? I mean, it's not been too many years to where you guys purchased this farm and then you went through this decision-making process of how to set the thing up. That is interesting to me, how you went about that. And primarily, I guess I'm asking about the flower, plantings, your flower operation. But like, how did you like look at the land and start making decisions? I mean, we're talking about layout
where
design
you're putting beds and how you orient them.
Yes. I mean, how do you, with a clean slate, sometimes that's pretty exciting to me. It's a little harder sometimes to work with existing, but how did, what was your process there?
Overwhelming, though.
Overwhelming,
Jessica just bought a farm too. You bought it, I guess, right before I did. So it's kind of the same, like thought processes can be really overwhelming when there's nothing there. So if that's you,
it's exciting, but some of the decisions probably that you make in the first few months is going to affect you for the next 20 years as far as maybe your infrastructure, like water heads and access and all that.
Thinking about access to water and access to, like, for a commercial scale, like your prep house, your washing station, your pack house. I'm trying to be as efficient as possible. So I want to minimize the amount of space between what's in the field and where it needs to end up. And so that was kind of a big thing. In fact, when I was planning, when we bought this farm, I had every intention of putting main production fields in the backfield because it was prettier and it was more protected from the wind. So that was like part of what my thought process was. But then when it like push came to shove and I started thinking about like we have to install water, we have to do all of these other things, it wasn't practical. So I ended up putting them in our bottom field close to our barn where the water and packing station would be.
So you had to be a little bit flexible,
I was going to say, in some ways, it's like some decisions were already made for you, like the location of the barn, and you had to orient, in proximity to that.
Yeah. Depending on your size, can you get equipment in and out? Right.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
Your equipment too. Like we have with our production, with vegetable production, we kind of got forced into where we set up, our stuff at originally, but we have a field that is not easy to get in and work the ground, or because we lay plastic and do trickle irrigation and stuff.
Is it like across a creek or some kind of restricted access?
It's just how it's laid out, and there's not a good clearance to turn a tractor around without fence. So with planning with that, grow a lot of produce, but also starting to do fruit production, and said, okay, that's hard area to work. So maybe let's put strawberries there. Something that's going to be a more permanent, blackberries in that area, something that's it's going to be a permanent crop, asparagus,
right?
If it, survives, if it doesn't get forgotten about.
If it does survive, it will multiply. It's asparagus.
Jessica and I are laughing because we both pulled, and if this makes you feel better, of how many things you've killed. Remember, Jessica and I have degrees and we teach people how to grow plants better, and yet we still both killed a very large blueberry planting, like separate farms, separate experiences, the same exact thing. So if it makes you feel better.
It was a good support system for each other to check in and then find each other's
She's like, how many
were
have you
also
killed? And I'm
struggling.
like, there's at least 30 dead as we speak. So
I'm like, okay, good, because I think I only have like 4 left. So
I think about things like blueberries, and you guys mentioned fruit plantings. That's when it gets real. I mean, it's one thing with annual crops when you have tomatoes or peppers or whatever that you can somewhat move around a lot easier. But when you get into more permanent perennial type crops, the considerations for me go way up. You want to be really careful. You're looking at soil profile, look at orientation, wind exposure, frost drainage. All of this stuff becomes super important. I mean, and which one of you guys said that you were looking? Was it Jessica? You guys are looking at like more perennial fruit crops. Both of you guys tried blueberries. We're not going to count that. We're just going to
you
say
should
write
count
that
them.
off.
We know what we did wrong. So that
there's value in mistakes and learning from them.
I have 12 plants left that we dug up and are in pots. So thank you very much.
Yeah, she's
not a total loss. Not a complete and utter failure.
Josh, you have more, I know you have a little bit more experience, but in permaculture. So I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that. But I know permaculture is a hot buzzword that I think some people
overuse
or don't use correctly,
or use as a panacea term for everything.
Sure.
Ultimately, it means that you want things to be the most efficient and to make the most sense, and that's what all of us in farming or grow with gardening are doing. So just call it whatever it is, but talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, from just to kind of clear up that terminology, because some people will just use the term permaculture to describe everything, and it kind of originates with this guy, Bill Mollison, who was in Australia in 70s, 80s, was an ecologist. And he basically kind of looked at a lot of different production systems that had been in their place for 1,000+ years and kind of evaluated them from an ecological perspective to come up with what are the common things we see in this. And it is very much an efficiency oriented system, and it's dictated by, what we were already talking about, one form of production would be annual beds, and so in a permaculture system those would be located in a certain proximity to the household, close, I would say, whereas perennial systems or ones that need less maintenance would be located further out. I think the aspect of permaculture, which is hundreds of things you can get into. The one that makes the most sense to me for design concepts and stuff like that is to think about the zone system, which if you think about it, it's kind of concentric circles where your
a
house,
bullseye.
Yeah, your house is zone 0, and it's the things that you have to touch and observe and interact with and have complex maintenance processes. They're all located there. And as you move out, you get into systems that are very low maintenance and kind of forage based, often more times perennial, but low maintenance perennials, things like that. And so that's how I'd kind of introduce that sort of topic of permaculture.
Yeah.
There's a lot to that, even for homeowners. You're talking about, a system that could encompass a lot of either, home or commercial, it sounds like, Josh.
Yeah,
but
they can do really huge scale, kind of 1,000 acres under permaculture management versus a household. There's a book that I don't let leave my house. The Permaculture Design Manual is the second edition was printed in 1988, and only about 300,000 were printed. If you can find it used,
no big deal.
Buy it.
Checking on
I purchased
eBay
it when I was a broke undergrad, but it's incredible. It's several hundred pages with really large illustrations and stuff like that, of describing. You can pick any climate regime, and there's several hundred pages on what your obstacles and opportunities are in that system.
You guys have already mentioned some critical things to me. Josh, one thing is the things that need the most attention, closer to the house. That makes great sense to me. Seems logical. And Jessica, you or Alexis mentioned, water and how important that is, which kind of goes into what Josh is saying as part of the infrastructure. Both of those things seem huge to me as, as far as really practical design aspects.
Yeah,
what
for
else?
Sure. Those resources, one of the things, what you all were talking about with annual production systems, or to get down to the details, your cut flower production beds, Alexis, what kind of dimensions are we talking about specifically? How wide are they? How long are they?
Yeah.
And is that kind of dictated by the mechanization you use?
Yeah. I mean, my operation, if we just called it annual operation, because I think annual flowers and annual vegetables can be treated very, very similarly and can be grown in similar ways. So like what Jessica's doing, where they're laying plastic, and her beds are going to be much different than my beds that are like more low till, and I'm using like fabric that I'm using over and over. So like my annual beds are like 4 foot wide, because I can reach 2 foot into the beds, and they overlap into walkways, and it's all about something that I could do on my own, or maybe need one more person for like big things. Like when I buy silage tarps, I buy a silage tarp that I can move with one other person, or I can move like with my tractor, or my little walk behind tractor, versus like some people will buy silage tarps that are huge, because they've got 4 people that are going to help them move that kind of thing.
Totally.
That's so important.
Yeah,
to like
yeah. So
like right, like how like if you're going to have that help for those things.
Yeah, how much help you're gonna have, like how much you want to like be bending over versus not, or mulching versus not. Like my peony beds are, I feel like, a good example. I have a friend who grows peonies on a commercial scale like I do, and some of this has to do with her zone, but we're similar enough where she does, with the kind of soil that she does mulch on her peas, like a heavy mulch system, and I have fabric down on mine. She farms full time. I don't. So she has a little bit more ability to stay ahead of the weeds, to get the mulch down at the appropriate time than I do. So I have fabric down on mine, just because that's the system that works better for me, and my soil is good enough where I don't have to, add organic matter every single year in the form of mulch. So like there's a lot of things when you're planning. Think of what you can do, or what you and whatever help you're going to do, help you have, are able to accomplish. And sometimes you don't know. Like my 4-foot beds outside in my annuals, the reason they're 4 foot is because that's what I was doing. That's what the book said to do. I think moving forward, as I slowly change my systems, with the time that I have, and, just as your business changes, which it's supposed to, I'll probably change to like a 3-foot bed system, just because I don't want to reach as far. And like I'm getting older. Like I'm getting older, like I'm just not able to do the things that I was doing before. And in my high tunnel, they're more like a 2.5 foot right now. And I really like that. So I'm thinking 3 foot would be really good. And every year I may convert 1 or 2 beds over to that system. But Jessica, you all have changed kind of some of the stuff you're doing, and on Jessica's kind of doing a much larger scale with their operation.
Yeah, just for us, because we end up selling at farmers markets, and what we have changed over the years is just knowing your limit of what to produce, and finding those right varieties that sell. And kind of like Alexis mentioned earlier, is like, oh, I really love that red celosia. Do I need that red celosia? That's like me and pumpkins. Do I need pumpkins?
You need another baby pumpkin. Yeah.
No, I don't. Do they take up a lot of space in your production system? Yes. So over the years, learning and figuring out what is taking up a lot of space, what actually sells, what doesn't sell, varieties that are good or bad, or like you said, like, do I have help to help me? Do I have help to help pick sweet corn? That's a big ordeal when sweet corn is ready. When tomatoes are ready, it's a big ordeal to make sure you have help with that. Just like we said with covering, we have strawberries on plastic this year. And so we're getting ready to cover. And so when we were thinking about that, instead of doing multiple long rows of it, my husband was thinking like, okay, how can we cover these easily if it's just the 2 of us?
Block them out.
And it's windy, right? Yeah. So he did shorter, smaller blocks of plastic that he put them on, so that we would be able to easily cover and uncover them when needed, because, the nightmare is to try to
the last couple of years you've had to uncover a lot and cover back up multiple times. Yeah. That's a great point.
Blown across the field.
Oh, yeah.
Or, are we going to be able to even, pull it across if it gets wet or something,
with the use of row covers, that's an awesome illustration of what we're talking about today. Is you have to really be careful. You have to know how many people is going to be working those covers. And it's just so much tougher if you have 3 really long rows versus maybe 6 rows that are half the length. It's usually easier to cover the block. than it is the rectangle.
Which is kind of goes like opposite of like if you talk and look up like really old manuals, like when they were doing the things that they wrote when you
in
were
the 1800s.
In the 1800s. But like when you're looking
when
at
it was
that,
an oral history of agriculture.
Yes, passed down
somebody
verbally.
wrote it down at some point. But efficiency wise, it's more efficient to have like depending on what it is. So like picking and putting down compost or tilling or any of those things is more efficient to have long rows, right? Because going in one direction and not
on a large scale, yeah, absolutely.
Around. But if you are like my outside beds, my perennial and my annual ones are in like 50-foot like blocks. So they're 50-foot long. And I could have done 100 feet, right? Like I could have made them longer, but because I knew, this is the equipment, this is how many people I usually have helping me, it made more sense to do kind of these shorter blocks that way. And to I love the term compartmentalize. I am a tree. I've said it before. I compartmentalize everything in my brain. And like, that's how I do my farm, right? It's sort of, Josh called them zones. I like call them compartments, and it's the same concept, but I have these compartments where that's how I rotate through. Compartment 1, 2, 3 rotates, or, this one has a tarp on it, and they're all standardized. So I think standardization is more, I would argue, maybe more important, or one of the most important things to whatever you're doing, like standardize what it is so everything is interchangeable. Has been really important to like how efficient my farm is.
And you mentioned having that rotation system, being able to rotate.
That's a big one, yeah.
Those fields is very important. We do a lot of tomatoes, peppers, but then also a lot of squash, and being able to rotate those fields out for disease and pest issues. And and like you said, having it all standard, right? So it's no big deal to, keep track, keep records, which is very important with all of this thing. And Alexis and I talked about that over the break. I think there was one day when I was like, hey, I found my very original planting records that I ever made from like 2012.
Was it a journal?
Our first year. I do have a garden journal as well.
Oh, you and Alexis both. Okay.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, we have come a long way since, that very first one. But it's nice and it's humbling to see, where you started to where you're at now. But having those records me,
put it down on paper or however you do things. Like if you're the person who likes to draw it on your iPad or put it onto an Excel spreadsheet or whatever that is, put it down on paper. And I do like many renditions. Like I'm a papered pencil person. And so I'll do many different like renditions of things. And so if you're planning, even if you've already bought your seed, no judgment, it happens, it's okay. Plan it out and things will change. Like I look at my planning sheet every year and what I said I was going to put in this spot isn't always necessarily exactly in that spot because the plants just weren't ready and I had to get things in before storm or, whatever, but it's close enough. And it helps me year to year to plan, to do that rotation, to figure out like, for me, height is very important. I mean, it's important vegetable production, right? Because you don't want anything shading out something else, right? And so I'll realize that this new variety of celosia I tried is much shorter than the other varieties that I've grown. So I'm going to grow that on the other end, and so that it doesn't get smothered in between these other two varieties in my row. Like things like that, you can, by having a plan, you can just kind of star those types of situations.
And that's a good point, Alexis. Even though it's the same plant on paper, that specific aspects of that variety, one may be more aggressive. So, and that all goes back to record keeping. That's a great point because a lot of times, tomato's a tomato. Well, there's a big difference between like a patio and a beefsteak or something. And, the subtlety like that is, I guess, what you have to capture in those records, whether you're talking about flowers or veggies or whatever. Yeah, that's a really good point.
We all get busy and, by the end of the season, and then we, have this period.
I tell myself I'll remember. I'll remember it. No, I won't.
Biggest lie I tell myself.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I had for supper yesterday. No clue. No
clue. You'll be looking at these seed catalogs and you'll be like, okay, but a lot of times you'll still get like companies will send you like, hey, this is what you ordered last year. Did you, do you want to just reorder that? Do you like that? But then you have to sit there and be like, did we like that? Was that tomato that was beautiful but tasted horrible? Was that the one that if it rained, it like busted or had horrible disease issue?
Yeah.
And you got to go back and take note of those things, especially, I mean, for personal, like if you just have your backyard garden too, you don't want to continuously grow things that are taste
and
terrible.
Your family won't eat. Yeah.
I've started, because sometimes I don't like taking notes on my phone. I'm a weirdo, and my husband always judges me for it. And so sometimes,
yes, we're all weird because we don't take notes.
Okay, that makes
there we go.
I hate it. So sometimes I don't have my like little notebook with me, and so what I'll at least do, and we're pretty much all in the age of technology, is I'll just take a picture, because that picture has a date on it. And then like it might be something as simple as like putting a thumbs down next to the tag that like says the name of it. And then I know. And so then when I'm ordering, I might just go back and be like, well, I know Celosia was blooming in June. And so I'll just go to June and find that photo. And I'm like, well, I put a thumbs down, so I'm not going to order that again. Like it doesn't always have to be something. And then maybe you transfer that to your notes or whatever, but make it as simple as possible, because you won't do it if it's not simple. And that's the same for your gardens. Like put your garden beds close to the house, like Josh said, in that zone 0 or zone 1, because if you see it, you'll deal with it. If you don't see it every day, you don't deal with it.
Yeah, that's important for like home gardens, especially because if you don't see it, you're either not going to water it, you're not going to know the pests are a problem, you're not going to know that the shiitake mushroom sitting under the shade tree were
that's
there and gone.
Perfect example, because that happened to me so with like times. I mean, I was working on basically somebody else's farm on leased space, so it's like nowhere near where I live. Like I'm getting in the car to drive to a place and yada yada. But I had set up a bunch of shiitake logs, and instead of putting them in a place where I would see them every day, it's not like they need to be prominent, and it's not like they need to be daily managed, but you need to look at them routinely, or you're going to miss it. And like that absolutely happened to me.
Very discouraging when you go out and see those little mushroom mummies, and I'm like, weeping there in the woods under the
one more
trees.
Even they're in my zone 0. They're literally out my back door. But that specific door, I have a bajillion doors. I live in an old farmhouse, so I have like a bajillion doors everywhere. But because we don't use that door very often, even though they are quite literally up against my house, I missed a bunch of them.
Yeah,
they were little shriveled mummies. So like, it's not just.
I need to go check mine then.
Right. Just
soon.
Because it all happens so
one
fast
of those examples.
With fungus. But
you could if you have to walk past it. You have to walk past something that's even tomatoes. You could use tomatoes as an example. If you're a homeowner, obviously you're not maybe looking as often. But I had that happen with like rabbits down. I've got a garden next to the creek, and it's down out of sight because it's the only spot I have. Sunlight exposure is okay, but the rabbits were just mowing stuff down the last couple of years, and I'm like, Mr. McGregor, here I am yelling, at the rabbits, but I was not looking as often. The only time I was going down there is when I was watering, and I was hand watering. It's a small plot, you go down there and check stuff out every week. The weekly was not enough. The rabbits must have sent out a text or something to their rabbit buddies, and it's just like the mushrooms.
Comes out on Tuesdays. We got the rest of the week.
Yeah, damage was done. Things happened. Decisions were made. Exactly. But the mushrooms, I've done that, Josh, so many times, and just timely things like that. If you're not looking at it and you don't have to actually pass it every day, that becomes an issue, especially with these small plantings. But a question for Jessica, you and Alexis, going back, specifically Alexis, I know with you, but how does the size of equipment, and I see this, with my local producers, but how does that determine like layout in some cases with the actual size of the equipment that you're working with? That makes a difference also, right? I mean, alleyways and things, driveways, you guys? Josh, I know you have experience here too.
So like I said, like we do a plastic layer, right? And we have like a 3-foot or 6-foot tiller that we have for our tractor. So to be able to get that in and then do proper spacing. So we are doing like 3-foot beds and then having at least 2 or 3 feet in between rows. Don't quote me on like exactly how that, is, but and then we don't have any other equipment to take down the rows except maybe a tiller, or we do sometimes like what Alexis mentioned, where we have fabric that we reuse every year that we roll down in between the rows to suppress weed pressure.
Yeah.
But I know Alexis is using much smaller equipment, that's easier to handle and get in her high tunnel.
Oh,
that does play like a really big factor in like what size plot you're going to have. And like the one I mentioned before, like we tried it like 1 or 2 years, but it was such a pain to try to get a tractor into that one other spot. And
Did you guys switch up equipment or like smaller based equipment?
That's when we decided, okay, we're going to put our perennial crops up here.
Got you.
Right.
Because we don't need to be trying to go in here.
Just such a hassle.
So that was like one of the plans with that. But definitely the size of the equipment you have, and, you know, do you want something that you can easily manage yourself, right? That you can do by yourself, or do you want something larger, like with the plastic layer? You at least need 3 people. I mean, you can do it. Yeah, I've seen people do it by themselves. Try to do it by themselves.
It's a process. Totally. It is. Jump on and off the tractor a lot.
An ideal situation, you need at least 3 people there to do it, to be efficient, and so you're not doing it all day. Right. But that's a big factor in, you know, layout.
Even if you're not using, like, I'm sure there's several of you on here that are saying, well, I don't do any mechanization. A wheelbarrow is mechanization.
Yes, that is.
Even if you're doing no-till gardening or something, you need to be able to get that wheelbarrow to fit down a row and to turn that wheelbarrow around just like you would a tractor. Like the same things apply. You know, if you've got a wagon that you're putting harvests, whether it's you're pulling it with a truck or you're pulling it by hand, can you fit your wagon down there?
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be even tractor size.
That's a good point too about harvest.
Harvest it. Like your driveways are huge. Yeah.
You know, how close can you get to your garden, even if it's like your own little garden? Because what are you growing that's going to be really heavy if you have like a big bumper crop of
that zucchini you forgot about?
Yeah. If you decide,
I checked it yesterday. Now it's 81 pounds. So, yeah. But that's a great point.
Get watermelons that the raccoons don't scratch apart and eat all of them, right? Like, how are you going to carry those out, right?
Or in my case, flowers have to be in water, so I'm lugging buckets of water. You know,
totally.
And that can be heavy. So even though flowers themselves are light, and for optimal vase life, they need to go directly into water as soon as they're harvested. So I'm not carrying pretty baskets of flowers back as most people imagine.
35-gallon buckets.
Skipping through the fields.
Yeah, skipping in my sundress.
Like the Danish sunsets. Yeah.
Yeah, frolicking around.
It's not, you're not sweating at all.
Never. It's never hot at a flower
field. Like Sound of Music meets flower farm.
It's exactly what it is. I sing a lot. Birds tend to land on my shoulders and sing with me.
Snow White. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah,
they
bring
you your hat and like settle it on your head.
But the driveways were always our biggest thing. Us guys were advocating all the time for Dad. We're like, let's add some more driveways in because we didn't want to carry anything another inch more than we had to. And he's like, that is so wasteful. So we were always going back and forth between efficiency and wasted space. So we wanted always more driveways, more alleyways. And Dad was like, no, we're not adding any more. And I'm like, but Dad, it would save us steps and time. And he says, get in the truck. You know, we had this discussion back and forth. Enough. And it's a balancing act. And those things evolve over time in an operation, your driveways and your access points and stuff.
Right.
If you have bigger fields, it's a big deal.
I think balancing act is a good way to think of it because it is that it's not necessarily that it's like wasted space, right? It's just space that's not in production.
Yes.
It becomes immediately critical for like, your actual process and harvesting and all that.
Yeah.
Like I remember one of the first farms I worked on had this pathways system where it was like they would have 3-foot wide beds and then a 3-foot wide pathway next to it. And it was like kind of, these strips that were probably like 100 feet long or something like that. And it was plenty of room to get in between with like wagons and all that kind of stuff. And it was pleasant to work in, and that's why they did it, right?
Yeah.
And if we really needed to, we could open up more of it, but we didn't need to, right?
Yeah, you'd be amazed. It's one of those like work with what you got situations. It's always amazing how much you can do in such a small area. In horticulture production, I think especially.
Intensity is there.
Yeah, you can have like, I mean, I know I talk about flowers a lot, but I think even in veggie production, depending on what you're doing, you can be a quote unquote commercial farm, like be a full-time farmer making your only income source on an acre. You can't say that in other areas of agriculture. Like you can, if you have an acre of tomatoes, like I'm praying for you because
right.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Can be a lot. Yeah, been there, done that. That's a lot.
Are always shocked by that. Like when you say we grow like a lot of tomatoes, right? And they think, you're like, I grow 800 tomatoes. They're like, oh my gosh. They're thinking like when you see row crops, right? But it's not. It's on way less than an acre.
Yeah,
right?
That's a lot of tomatoes, though.
But that's a lot of tomatoes.
That's a lot of tomatoes, yeah.
That's my favorite when you have like row crop farmers who are, or, you know, maybe they did tobacco or whatever. So these kind of like traditional ag guys that transition into horticulture crops. And they're always like, I'm probably going to put in like 3 acres of, you know, watermelons or sweet potatoes, because
you
they
can tell their
work on
background a little bit.
hundreds and thousands of acres sometimes. So when they do it and you're like, I wouldn't recommend that. And they're like, oh, it'll be fine. And, you know, they have all the equipment, they have sprayers, they have all this stuff, but then they do it. And after that season, they almost always decrease. Like,
I tell them, I'm like,
they don't really make like a tomato combine, you know?
No,
yeah, like it's
not readily. I say 10 times less space and 10 times more labor.
Yeah,
that
like
gets
that,
you,
right?
that gets you close. So it's the 10 by rule. I'm like, they're like, what? Then you start to talk about labor, and the conversion factor is pretty rough between row crops and, you know, horticulture production can be, because we've got a long history of row crops in the state of Kentucky. And horticulture, not so much, even though we have a great horticulture production in the state. It is a different language, and the scale, Alexis, say, the scales are just amazing when they really have to, you can tell people's backgrounds of production based on how they talk about things. They're like, yeah, that's on the back 400 acres. I'm like, they're not tomato farmers. Yeah, right away. They're not tomato
Even
farmers.
the back 10 acres is not a tomato
They're
farmer.
not tomato, yeah.
Right.
Maybe pumpkin growers, not tomato farmers. Yeah, exactly. But the functional layout, and I think about things like sweet corn. We get that question a lot with newer farmers, especially, you know, between as far as, you know, like pollination issues and long rows versus square blocks and things like that, and worried about cross pollination. There's a functional design aspect to you know, big and small farms here in Kentucky that you need to consider when you even thinking about pollinators, or if you're growing pumpkins. I guess Jessica, there's specific layouts depending on how aggressive and how big the vines get, and all this stuff that you accumulate, all this knowledge over time on layout. So the record keeping becomes just so very important. Or if you're planting blueberries that live, sorry guys, if you're planting blueberries, you probably want to have those together. And to me, blueberries, I don't think about the plants. I think about the end game. I think about the netting. I base blueberry layout not on the plants, but on how I'm going to get nets over those things.
That's a good point.
So, you know, certain crops like that, it's about the plants, but it's also about, you know, the special requirements like netting, or if you have organic production that you're going to have to pull, you know, fabric over. That's all that goes into the consideration, and that's considerations beyond the needs of the plants. So yeah, it's interesting.
Jessica, do you put any thought? Sometimes it's easier said than done to be able to. It's a luxury to be able to put in thoughts on how your rows run in a field, like the direction they run.
Oh yeah,
because it's not. Sometimes it's not always the way the slope is, or whatever.
East-west, for maximum sun exposure.
Is that something you were able to put thought into and do, or
kind of? Well, where all of our stuff is now is just kind of like, that was our only option in the beginning, right? It was like one of those things, we've made it work. The other fruit plantings, before we decided that we were going to make that other location the fruit plant, like we were able to pick with that because of how the slope was and everything in that area. We're like, okay, we're definitely putting fruit up here because they're higher up. We don't want them to be down, you know, low with cold air and all of that. But it was one of those situations where, like, okay, at the time before we actually owned real farmland, you know, this is our options, because prior to that we were further away from a water source. So that was the real factor. And it was like, we're now close to a water source. And so
we keep saying water source, and like Ray even said he had to like hand water, and he didn't go see his so it was his garden. I'm gonna pick on you, Ray, because you've been picking on me about my blueberries.
Absolutely.
So Ray did everything wrong in this situation. Okay, he put his
wouldn't be the first time.
He put his garden away, like further away from home, where it's out of sight, out of mind, and he had to hand water it. Which hand watering is fine, but he's hand watering something he's not looking at regularly, and hand watering can be very tedious.
Buckets of water,
exactly.
Down a slope.
Degrees.
That's like one of the biggest like labor sinks in like all the developing world, is dragging water to the plants.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
every time I hand water something, which I hand water most of my transplants when I put them in, just because I feel better. Like I think I think it saves me money in the long run, but I cringe every time I do it because I'm
Do
like,
you do it with like the beam and the 2 cans on either side?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Maximize your strength ratio.
I'm not even doing it that bad. I've got a hose and good pressure, and I'm not lugging the hose all that far, but it makes me mad every time I do it because I'm like, there's got to be a better way. But
I can see the black and white like infomercial in slow-mo where you're just dropping everything.
Throwing it down and walking into the sunset.
I'm literally falling over the hose.
Yeah.
Just it's like one of those spray nozzles and it's flying up in the air like one of those like wacky
like a fire hydrant hose that's like knocking people down.
Just rolling around and screaming.
Water's such a big issue. It was crazy. And that was a great I'll plug the Fruit and Vegetable Conference. If you guys listening missed that and you're here in Kentucky, you missed a good meeting. But one of the breakout sessions was on-farm water management. It was very interesting hearing from these larger commercial producers how they've creatively kind of manage water and think about water, and it's kind of the foundation of their farm. And those producers, new producers outside of the state, of course, as you go into the West and larger scale productions and water rights becoming more of an issue, it's just incredible. Here in Kentucky, we're blessed with a lot of awesome water resources, but man, they base their operations. One person, one of the biggest in the state, producers, said, I base my production off the number of ponds I can build. And it was really interesting. It was totally interesting. And where he put those ponds and how that affected his pumping capacity, distribution system, so on and so forth. Fascinating.
Yeah.
But
that's a huge topic in permaculture design is about like ponds, pond location, and the use of topography. Because like a pond at a low point is easy to build. But it's a huge investment to be able to put a pond or some kind of water storage system up at elevation.
We had one of those on the farm I grew up on. It was a farm that was a pond that was a catchment basin actually for a reclaimed strip mine that had fully, went through succession. Trees had grown up, but the pond still was there and didn't really fill up with sediment. So we were able to take advantage of this high elevation pond, and it fed several of our fields, and we never had to have a pump. We did gravity flow, and it was probably ran a quarter mile up on the mountain. Yeah. We had incredible pressure.
It's like a battery. It's like so much potential energy stored up there. When I was working out west on this at this outdoor school, kind of like Western New Mexico, you would see a lot of these farms where they would put a large gravity tank up on the top of a mesa, and it was connected to kind of like a windmill sort of system that would be pulling water way up and then just keeping it up there for when they did need it. Because they definitely, you still need water. You need to even kind of periodically flood fields to deal with like salinity issues. So the capacity and ability to deliver water anywhere at pressure at large volumes is like, it runs your whole life.
I think we had like 90 pounds of pressure at the base. We had to use a pressure reducer with no pumps whatsoever. Totally. And we had huge capacity and huge pressure because Dad would go from a large pipe down to a smaller. And just the elevation drop, you calculate that out now, easily to calculate the pressure gain. But it was insane pressure. But we did not know what a resource we had. It was awesome. Yeah, it was great. And with no maintenance whatsoever. And it was clear water. We didn't even have to run a sand filter on it. It was amazing. Wow. Yeah.
Well, back in the 1800s, there wasn't the pollution there is now. So
our mules that were in the barn that we ran the line through, and this is true story. They love that water. It's mules that I plowed with. Our smaller fields, I plowed with those mules. I did. That was our answer in the eastern part of the state. We had a lot of smaller fields, and you could not turn our tractors around in them. And when I was younger, that was my first job. Is I would plow those small tobacco fields. I would hand cultivate those with our mules.
Makes sense.
Our 3 and 5 foot plows. Yeah. Because you couldn't turn tractors in them. And Dad gave me the profits from those. So I was super motivated as like a 10-year-old. I was like out there working mules. I was 10, 11 years old and had a team of mules. And man, we made some money back. I learned very quickly farming, if done correctly, you could make some money on it. So yeah.
If everybody just imagined like baby Ray with a team of mules, I'm with you.
I did.
Big fun. It's big fun.
Essentially, I imagined his son because they're twins.
Yes.
And I just laughed. Like
Reed would be riding the mule, not working the mule. He would definitely be riding the mule. Yeah, but that, I mean, sometimes you just have to be creative in these situations and take advantage. My father was so good about taking advantage of topography or taking advantage of these small fields that normally, would go by the wayside. And, he was really good at that. So I appreciate that.
I want to give
you want to think of obstacles as opportunities when it comes to like topography and stuff.
Yeah.
If it's a ball made out of cheese, I'm going to eat through it.
A little shout out. I think NRCS can do a lot of help visiting your farm and looking at topography and looking out maybe where a pond needs to go or, where a hedgerow can be helpful. And hey, by the way, we have grants for this. So, I know sometimes it can take a while to get them out there because there's not that many of them and they're kind of running a couple counties at a time, but reach out, especially this time of year, if you're kind of in a planning phase, have bought a new farm or wanting to expand, and they can help you think about, the way the wind's going to come, how do you set your high tunnel up or, something along those lines, where to establish perennial rows, things like that. So just kind of giving a shout out, and those, NRCS is nationwide. So no matter where you're listening from, you should be able to contact your local. Are they called agents? What are they called?
NRCS? I think they're like technical specialists. I don't know.
Yeah.
Call them agents, whatever.
We're agents, so we like that term. But so contact them. They can be really helpful. Mine just called me the other day and was talking about some opportunities that we could have on the farm on areas that we don't want to mow anymore, and how do we make that work for the environment and things like that. So that was pretty cool. But I think we're going to wrap it up. One other episode I wanted to we talked about kind of irrigation. We have an episode on like low flow irrigation and collecting water and stuff like that. So if you've not heard that and that piqued your interest, go back and check that out. I don't remember what episode it was.
Late summer 2023, I think. So
okay, yeah. I think it's called like low flow irrigation or something.
That was aired in September 24th. Barrels, rainwater catchment, low flow.
It was a good one. I enjoyed that one.
That was a good one. So even if you're doing like small scale, you got a couple raised beds you want to water, or if you're going large scale, like I want to put one on my high tunnel to water the high tunnel this year. She has big goals, big hopes and dreams. But things like that, check out that episode. And I think we are kind of wrapping this up. We should have Brett on next time. Not that Jessica wasn't amazing and I want her back all the time. But if you've been missing the sultry voice of Brett Wolf, he will be back with us on the next episode. But we're glad to have you here. Thank you so much for listening. Follow us on Instagram, Hort Culture Podcast. You can shoot us an email. That's in the show notes. If you have ideas for episodes or, want to know about something cool, or hey, if you want to be on the episode, let us know. We've had some people reach out on Instagram and we're like, I do this cool thing and can you talk about it? And by the way, if you want me on, so that sounds fun. So reach out to us. We're always eager to hear that. And thank you, Jessica, for joining us once again because you're wonderful. Welcome. I needed some feminine energy up in here. So thank you for that. Thank you for joining us. Check us out next week. We're talking about more cool things, more plant things, because this is the Horticulture Podcast, and that's what we do here. Have a great day. Thanks for being here.